Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. We're here to recap weekend 2 around the SEC. A little bit more interesting stuff this weekend than there was last weekend, so enough to chew on here. It was a good weekend. We're building to something. I feel like, if this were like in the NFL preseason, we're building to something week after week, right? Back in the days when they had 4 preseason games, remember, like week 3 was the dress rehearsal week, and week 4 was the back off week. That's kind of what we're building to here. So week 2 was, we're getting a little more stretched out. So we will touch on a whole bunch of stuff. Arkansas's weekend, Auburn tournament, Kentucky's tournament, Georgia's comebacks, all kinds of stuff. But before we get to any of that, I have to let you know that this episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover is brought to you by Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. The easy-to-use and affordable technology makes the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. All right, this is I'm thankful, Mark, that you were kind of at your home base this weekend because you had a chance to watch some stuff, and I was at the Jacksonville tournament, covering those games, doing some analysis work with Darren Vaught in the TV booth for the stream for D1 Baseball. I assume offers for me to do that full time are just going to start coming in left and right. So frankly, my days here doing this podcast with you are probably numbered. Let's be honest. Yeah. That's just the reality. I don't want to lie to anybody about that. So my days as a star are upon us, I'm sure. But for today, I'm going to go ahead and humble myself and do this podcast.
You killed it, man. You really did a good job.
Yeah. Jokes aside, sincerely, I had a lot of fun doing it. Darren makes it easy. Like, the guy's a pro. He's willing to play around. Like, he's funny. He's willing to not be. He knew I was going to come in and try to make some jokes and make light of some things while also trying to add some insight. And so I'm super thankful that KP and Darren gave me a chance to do that, because it was a lot of fun. So whether it's a one deal or I do it again in the future, I had a good time doing it. So I appreciate you saying so. Before we get to Auburn, which is the team I saw this weekend, let's actually talk about Arkansas, because it feels like, even though they lost a game, which feels weird, they did lose that extra inning game to Oklahoma State Saturday night. Yeah. That to me feels like the story, and I just added it up. I will give you these stats, Mark, and then I will toss it to you to see if you can put words to these stats. The weekend rotation of Hagen Smith, Brady Tiger, and Mason Molina combined to throw 17 innings, giving up 6 hits, no runs, 4 walks, 33 strikeouts. Again, 17 innings pitched, 6 hits, no runs, 4 walks, 33 strikeouts. Now,
incredible.
Hagen Smith 17 on Friday really set the tone, but Tiger and Molina not as dominant, but just about as effective, honestly.
Yeah.
So impressive stuff there. So again, Mark, you're the more of the wordsmith here of the two of us. So please put words to what Arkansas did this weekend on the mound.
Yeah. I mean, the starting pitching is just incredible. And then the bullpen isn't much of a drop off, right? Because that's the thing. A lot of times you have these great rotations, and then, hey, let's just get the starter out of there, and we feel pretty good about it. And it still might be true. You might feel better about it, but there's not a big drop off. And I think as the season goes on and these guys get stretched out even longer, that's going to be more of an advantage, right? Because they can withstand it if somebody has a bad day or has a little tenderness or whatever. That's where Arkansas is. Now, the question will be, are they going to hit enough? And we all wondered that, heading into the year. I just don't think they're going to have to hit, they're not going to have to score a lot. Obviously, it came back to bite them in the 14-inning game, right? They just couldn't get enough against Oak State. But I do think that, over the long haul, I'll take my chances with that pitching staff. And especially, Hagen Smith, from reading Aaron's story and from what I saw with that Friday, he had such a rough start last week. It was like mid-30s temperature wise, and he just couldn't couldn't get right. He had a 42 pitch first inning, and it just didn't work. And he came back in normal circumstances to play baseball in this week, and was basically just unhittable. He just did whatever he wanted. He struck out 17 in 6 innings. Struck out the first 15 outs that he got were all by strikeouts. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that people remember years from now, because it was that kind of unique outing. And he's not going to do that every week, but I think he's going to do enough of that he's going to scare you every Friday night, regardless of who you are, because you got to match up with him. And there's not going to be many people in the country who are going to be able to do that. But we'll see where this goes, because you have to repeat that, and that's kind of been the thing with him. He was pretty efficient. He was very efficient Friday to get all those strikeouts and not drive his pitch count up, and that's really been his thing. Last year, he was dominant at times, but he threw a lot of pitches to do it. And if he shrank that down, then he's a different kind of pitcher than he was a year ago. And he was good last year, but they're in a position where, with him on Friday, if he's going to get you deep in games with as good as Tigert and Molina are on the next 2 games, then they don't have to stretch at all in that bullpen. And it's a different type of team that you're going to face than the one that you saw in Fayetteville last year.
Yeah, the question is, I thought about this just kind of as I saw these games roll by of how much concern should we have offensively. I mean, 19 hits in 3 games. And, that already doesn't sound like a lot, but then you consider they played 14 the one time. So we're talking about 32 innings of baseball, not 27.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it did get them. It cost them in that Oklahoma State game, like you said. And after this game, you look at their overall stats, they're hitting 248 as a team.
Yeah.
However, I think for the reason you stated is the biggest reason I'm not too worried. I don't think the bar is going to be that high for what they need to do. And then it's the thing we've said all preseason about them. It's just I think they're always going to have an effective offense. I just think that's kind of a constant with this program. And I do like that some of the guys now, Kendall Diggs is hitting 370. So that's a guy you expected, but there are a lot of guys in this group of guys who have been the best bats for them so far that you weren't necessarily looking at that way, like Jared Sprague-Lott, frankly, leading the team in hitting. And then you have guys a little bit further down, like Bahila Aloy or Hudson White, Jason Jones, who we kind of assume are going to be better than what they've been so far. So if you're telling me that those guys haven't come around yet, but Jared Sprague-Lott has been a big part of things, I'm going to take that as kind of a positive, which is no disrespect to Jared Sprague-Lott, but he just wasn't among the transfers one of the guys whose name you heard a lot in terms of, hey, this is going to be a catalyst for us. So yeah, I think they'll get it figured out, but man, it just, to your point, figuring it out might just be being an average offense, and that should be enough.
I think one thing to keep in mind is they're not hitting home runs right now. They've only hit 4, all season, which is last in the conference. I think as the weather warms up, I mean, they're not playing in great hitting conditions. Weather warms up, that could change, and that could make that offense look a little bit different.
I think one other thing to consider too, and I didn't see what they did this weekend. I guess I should maybe check up on that to see if I'm still feeling the way I was feeling about this. Let me look before I just pop off with some hot takes. Yeah, so I wonder, because we also had questions about them offensively and kind of just generally against James Madison. Well, since they played James Madison beat Virginia Tech and swept Fairfield, which, okay, Fairfield, Northeastern team, but that's a good Northeastern team. Mm-hmm. James Madison just might be good. So that might be the kind of series we look at the end of the year and go oh, okay, that makes a lot more sense now. Mm-hmm. Like when a team maybe had played Georgia Southern early in the season 2 years ago, the year Georgia Southern hosted, and I think maybe Tennessee played them that year actually. And it's Georgia Southern kind of fought them a little bit, and you think, well, that's weird. But then you look at the end of the season and, oh, actually, that's a really good series win in hindsight. So maybe that's what we're going to see with James Madison, and that we kind of looked at him sideways last week, and maybe by the end of it, it makes a lot more sense that they had a tough time. So that certainly seems on the table. Coming up for them, obviously, they've things lighten up a little bit. They've got Murray State and McNeese the next 2 weekends before they start SEC play. So a couple weekends where I think we'll start to be able to look if their offense is hitting around 250 coming out of those 2 weekends, maybe we recalibrate some things. But I don't think we're going to have that conversation. That's kind of my feeling on it.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's talk about Auburn. That's where I was in Jacksonville to see the Tigers firsthand. They went 2-1, wins over Iowa. They took down Brody Brecht. Well, they took down the bullpen after Brody Brecht left, is the way I actually should put it. But they beat Iowa. They trounced Wichita State. And before you look askance at that, Wichita State also beat Iowa today. That team played hard. That team played well. The 2 other games this weekend, but Auburn made them look like amateur hour. So they win those first 2 games. They lose a hard-fought game tonight. I just got back from the ballpark. Really well-played game between Auburn and Virginia. The defense was, for a February game, and it was kind of cold. I mean, it was Jacksonville, so it wasn't that cold, but it was chilly for Jacksonville. And so a February game in chilly conditions, you don't expect the defense to be what really stands out to you, but it was. I mean, Bobby Pierce robbed a home run, or came close anyway. But Virginia turned a couple really slick double plays. Derek Fabian made some nice plays at third base for Auburn. So, and they just came up short end. Virginia just outplayed them a little bit. Got some 2-out hits. That happens.
Yeah, they were in that Virginia game, and the bullpen just couldn't make enough pitches. So I do think that another team, as pitching staff gets stretched out, also can be really good. He's kind of hit or miss. He didn't go really deep in the game, not because of pitch count. I think it was just because of effectiveness. And then you got Gonzalez, who was good, I thought, just watching on video, as he continues his comeback story. And then I thought Myers did some things. I was pleased with how he looked on Sunday. That's a pretty good rotation, and they have pieces behind them. There's a lot of depth there, and I do think that they've got a shot to have a pretty good weekend bullpen. The thing offensively, I really like how versatile that lineup is. They've got speed guys, they've got power guys, they've got double guys, they've got a little bit of everything. And I think as a result, that's going to be a lineup that's going to give people a lot of problems as the year goes on.
Totally agree on all accounts. On the lineup, I think it's interesting kind of the way they've built the lineup, where it's almost like they're kind of mixing in the skill sets too. They've been leading off with Cooper Weiss, who is an athletic guy who can run a little bit, but he's also got some pop. But then you've got Ike Irish, and we know what he's about. And Bobby Pierce and McMurray are in the middle there. But today, they've kind of wedged Chris Stanfield between those power bats. And Stanfield has some pop, but he's mostly going to be a gaps guy and run the bases guy. And so it is kind of interesting that as an opposing pitcher, it's not just that their lineup is deep, although it is. It's that you've got, sometimes you'll go speed, power, speed, power, speed. And it's just every batter is a different look. And I think that's a particular challenge because, okay, you get through Pierce and McMurray, and then, well, if they're both on base and here comes Stanfield, now the bunt becomes an interesting play, because it's not just, hey, I'm going to square early and we're just going to get it down and get the guys over. It's, hey, this guy can run. We're going to need to play this bunt well. And normally your 4 or 5 guys get on, your 6 guys, probably not a guy who's typically been doing a lot of bunting. It's probably not a guy who you would assume would be a good runner, right? But it's a little bit different with this lineup. Or even if, some of the guys, Mason Maynard can run a little bit. He's a guy who could be in that 5-6 spot, or Javon Hernandez, right? So to your point about the versatility, they can just do a lot of things well. But I really like the way Bobby Pierce swung the bat. He ended up winning MVP of the tournament. I really like the way he swung the bat. I really like the way Cooper McMurray swung the bat. What's not to like about Ike Irish? I think that the middle of that order is sneaky really good. It's not as sexy, right? As some of the middle of the line, like you probably like the Petrie Messina combination better in terms of like name value. You know, obviously Caglione,
A&M.
Shelton, A&M certainly, Laviolette, Montgomery, but that group, that trio, like it doesn't have the blockbuster boldface names the others do, but like I'll take that trio with just about anybody in the league, especially with the way they swung the bats this weekend. So I really felt positive about that.
Yeah. What would you say would be Auburn's, ceiling? Are they an Omaha kind of club, or do you think they're more of a host or regional kind of team?
I think they are, certainly can be. If the pitching stays healthy, then it's a definitive yes. I think it's an Omaha type club because I think the offense is versatile. I think the offense I think in today's game, there's no way around it. I get that some people just think it's almost like offensive to their senses. Like you got to be able to hit a 3-run home run. You just got to, and they can do that, but they can also run. They can defend. I like the defensive pieces. Weiss is super solid. Fabian's a good athlete who can play everywhere. Bobby Pierce is a great right fielder. I like Stanfield's athleticism, so they can defend for sure. They're not Kentucky in that regard, but they can really defend. But the key will be the health on the mound and being able to establish those roles. But I liked what I saw from Gonzalez. He pitched better than his numbers in his start. A couple things there is, one, he gave up the 3 runs, but I'm checking. 3 runs. I got my book here. But that was in the second inning of that game, and it went hit batter, single, home run, boom, boom, boom. And suddenly Wichita had 3 runs. That's just, some of that's just bad luck with the clustering of those hits. So, and then secondarily, Butch in the post game kind of suggested, look, Auburn already had a big lead at that point, when he was working into the finished 4 innings. He'd already thrown 70 pitches. I got the sense that if it was a tight game, or if there hadn't been so many long breaks where, Gonzalez is sitting in the dugout for 30 minutes because Auburn's hitting for 30 minutes, that he could have pushed for more, but was just kind of like, we don't need to do this. We're not going to just run him back out there. So I think he actually pitched better than the numbers suggest. And having him healthy, we've talked about it a lot. It just takes so much pressure off everyone else because he's going to compete. He's going to battle. He tends to be fairly efficient because he's not looking for strikeouts. He's looking for rollovers. So that helps. But then it takes pressure off of, okay, Alsop does not have to be like high-end Friday dude to be effective. Like just be solid. Just be you. Be like Auburn's Brody Brecht. Like maybe you don't go 5 innings every time out, but can you give us quality? Yeah. And then I'm with you on Myers. The guy just knows what he's doing, and that's really no surprise. His dad, for those who don't know, is Matt Myers, who was longtime pitching coach, who now I actually had heard today he took a job in the Pirates organization, so he's going to be working on the pro side now. But so his dad's a pitching coach. No surprise that he's got some polish, but his stuff plays up. Like he knows how to use his stuff. He wasn't as sharp today as he was a week ago, but there was nothing alarming about the outing to me necessarily. So I'll be interested to see, like, is he an all-conference guy in the SEC? Probably not. But if he's your Sunday guy, you're in really good shape. And then the bullpen, you think about just with the guys I saw today, right? Like Herbert Holtz pitched today. Like that's a guy we thought could have and easily been in the rotation, and they're using him as a bullpen piece. That's a huge advantage there. Tanner Bauman, same thing. Guy who has had some starts, could theoretically start, gives an interesting look as a starter. Will Cannon the other day, same thing. Cam Tilley will probably be a rotation guy at some point in his Auburn career. Yeah. Like that's a really important card to play for them because they've got some guys with stuff on this staff, but it's mostly not a staff of big time stuff. So when you put a Cam Tilley in there, and his stuff is not as good as it will be, but you can tell that this is a high end arm on a staff of guys that aren't necessarily high end arms, and so he gives teams a different look. It's almost like when he gets on the mound, and I saw him pitch a couple nights ago, there's almost this aura around him because you're used to with Auburn. Here's a pitchability guy, and here's a sinker guy, and here's a fastball changeup guy who's going to just like change up you to death, and then here's Cam Tilley, who is not a finished product, but already looks like, oh, this is like a future Friday guy, right?
Yeah.
He already has that look about him, even if he's not a totally polished product, which I think is great news for Auburn. So as long as that group stays healthy, I really like the bullpen because they give you a ton of looks and it's deep, which again, with the injuries last year was a problem. They didn't have a lot of cards to play when it was all said and done. And they got 110% out of everybody last year on the staff. And this year they just don't have to in the same way. And I think that's a huge luxury for them. So that's a little bit of filibustering, but to answer your question directly, yeah, I think it's an Omaha club if the pitching can stay in its roles, can stay healthy. This definitely could be an Omaha club for sure. I mean, I think the floor is high, right? I mean, I think it's a high floor of being on the regional bubble, high end 2 seed at the floor for me is what this team is. I feel really good about them coming out of the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of club I think that they have enough experience and they have enough guys who have been through it, and then they've supplemented with some talent, especially in the infield where they come in, and those are older players too. So it's not like you're trying to win with freshmen or super talented guys. You have some of those, but you have some grinders, right? And you have some people that have done it, maybe not at the SEC level, but they've had success elsewhere. And I think that's going to, Butch is going to get as we talked about, Butch is going to get the most out of guys. And I think Auburn's got a chance to have a big year.
Totally agree. Let's move on and talk briefly about Kentucky. They were at one of the other tournaments. They played in Round Rock. They go 2-1 out there. They lose Friday to Washington State. Offense really got shut down on Friday. 2 hits. They scored 4 runs, but that was on 2 hits. So not great from that standpoint. But they win the next 2 days, 11-5 over Texas State. Good offensive performance there. And then they won today against Kansas, 8-5. And I said this on Weekend Waypoints, like, forget about your older brother's Kansas. Like this Kansas team, I don't know if they'll be a regional team or not, but they're clearly a lot more talented than they were even 2 or 3 years ago. So, well, maybe not more talented because they had Cooper McMurray and Maui Ahuna and Skylar Messenger, but they're a better team now than they were 2 or 3 years ago. So that's a good win is what I'm saying there. So 2-1 for Kentucky. And my big takeaway here is I'm not shocked that they're have individual moments where they struggle offensively because this is not a high-powered offense. We know what we're dealing with here. And if they don't get guys on base, it's going to be hard to execute what they want to do.
Right.
For me, the more interesting thing and the thing that I'll be watching for is that so much of what this season will be once we get to SEC play is going to be, are Smith and Moore in the rotation, are they going to be able to go toe-to-toe with other guys in the SEC? And it's 2 starts. I don't want to overreact, but they have not been to that level yet. Smith against Washington State, 5 innings, 6 hits, 4 runs, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts. That's okay, but it's Washington State had a good weekend. Probably not an SEC level offense, I have to imagine. So that's concerning there. And then Mason Moore against Kansas, 4 1/3, 6 hits, 2 runs, 3 walks, 5 strikeouts. Again, that's okay, but that's a total of 9 hits and walks in 4 1/3 innings. That's almost a 2 whip, obviously. So about a 2 whip. So those guys are just going to have to be better, and maybe they will. Like again, 2 weeks. I don't want to go overboard here, but it seems like that's just the offense is going to have days like they had Friday, and you just kind of hope that the pitching is able to offset some of that.
Yeah. I think the interesting piece for me with them is they're going to play so many close games because their margin for error is so small. They're not going to bludgeon you to death and put up the crooked numbers, at least not with any regularity. So the bullpen is going to be really important, and having those starters get deep in games so you're not using the bullpen, and you're not maybe that guy you don't really want to use doesn't have to pitch. And I think that's going to be big for them. I mean, Evan Byers worked 3 scoreless frames, in one of the wins this weekend. That's big for them. They need guys who can step forward and do that and get and put up those zeros because, as you saw last year, they're there's going to be a lot of games where they're 1 and 2 runs, and being able to hang on and win, and and be able to just keep the bases empty, because just like with Georgia, right, where they come storming back and have a couple of comeback wins. Everybody's going to make a run in this league, so you've got to have those. You got to have guys you can depend on who can at least limit the traffic on the bases, and that's really what I want to see from Kentucky. In addition to what you mentioned with the rotation.
Agreed. And I think one other thing, I mentioned when I was comparing Auburn's defense to Kentucky's, saying, well, they're not Kentucky, but Kentucky made last week in the midweek 4 errors against Morehead State.
Mm-hmm.
They made 3 against Washington State in Friday's game, and just 1 the next 2 days of the weekend. But this is a team that would have streaks of not making errors. And so the defense is not, again, another small sample, but the defense has not been what it was last year. I mean, right now they're fielding 963. Like, that's not even close. Yeah. I mean, that's 24 points shy of what they fielded last year. So that's just going to have to get cleaned up. And I trust that it will, because most of the key pieces are the same people in the case of like Petre and Grant Smith, but are also good defenders. Mitchell Daly, Ryan Nicholson. You still have Devin Burks behind the plate. So, I think that's probably just some quirky stuff they've just happened to cluster errors together, but it is something to monitor, because the defense was such a, really was the secret sauce for last year's team, as they just weren't beating themselves. They threw strikes and they fielded the ball. And that shows you that how far those things can take you. So something to watch there. Georgia had an interesting weekend. They two walk-off wins against Northern Kentucky. That series just frankly was a lot more competitive. Like, kudos to Northern Kentucky. But after a 15-5 win for Georgia the first day, the next 2 games were one-run games, and both involved big comebacks for Georgia. So let me pose this to you, Mark.
Yeah.
Is it more concerning that Georgia had to work so hard to sweep Northern Kentucky, or is it heartening that they kind of had this gear to find to put them back in these games and win them in walk-off fashion?
Yeah, I mean, they had just been rolling through the competition. I mean, they had not had a game closer than 9 runs until those 2 that they had to come back, and to score 3 in the ninth kind of shows you something, right? It shows you that they have a gear that they could come back and do it. And then in Sunday's game, they were behind, then they jumped way out ahead, and then they blew that lead, and that is definitely concerning. But then they fought back to get the walk-off win again. The thing that's really interesting for me is they lead the SEC in home runs, and I know the competition hasn't been superb, but they're not the only one whose competition hasn't been great, and they continue to excel there. Charlie Condon is just having an incredible year. We wondered if anybody would pitch to him. Well, they are so far. He's 18 for 28, which is a 643 batting average. If he continues to do that, he's going to see a lot of walks. But he's off to just a tremendous start. He's had 2 hits or more in every game so far this year.
His OPS is over 1,800.
Oh, it's just crazy.
His on-base percentage is 694. His slugging percentage is 1179, because he's got 4 doubles, a triple, and 3 home runs. So of his 18 hits, he's got 8 extra base hits. Yeah, what else can you say about the guy? Like, he's just – I said this – did I say this to you, Mark? I know I said it on radio at one point, but – this is hard, maybe a little hyperbolic because Tommy White exists, but like, we're probably not giving Charlie Condon enough run for the possibility that he might be the best hitter in college baseball.
Yeah.
I mean, because
he's off to an incredible start. Right. Establishing that is one thing, but continuing it, all year is another. And obviously he's not going to hit 600, but I think he's got a great shot to hit over 400, and with his power numbers, I mean, that's if you hit 400 with 20 plus homers, you're in elite company. So,
and that's what makes Tommy White so special is, and you and I are not scouts, we're not professional coaches, but what we see with our eyeballs combined with what you hear about Tommy White when we talk to coaches is just like, yeah, the power's great and he's got raw power, but he has just really good feel to hit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like his barrel finds the ball and he knows what pitches to hunt. He knows when he needs to, poke a ball the other way. He knows when he needs to bring his hands in. Like he has a lot of feel for hitting. It's not just him up there swinging the bat in case he hits it. And it's kind of the same thing with Condon. I mean, I don't think it's nothing that, he put up those numbers last year and they had other good hitters, right? Connor Tate had a really good year, Parks Harbor, Ben Anderson, but it's not like that was, a lineup that let me put it this way. It was clear he was the guy you had to game plan around.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, right.
Right.
He had the year he had. And so anyway, I say all that to say, like, we're probably honestly kind of underrating this guy, and I'll be interested to see. I mean, it's his draft year.
Right.
I'm kind of interested to see where he falls into the pecking order, because I think we have a good feel for Tommy White and Jack Caglione and Travis Bazzana from Oregon State,
Mm-hmm.
guys like that. Where does Condon fit in with that group there? That'll be interesting.
Yeah, and he's such a long, lean guy, and traditionally, a lot of those guys struggle, right? When they get to the big leagues, it's a bat's got to go a long way, right? So the question is, how he has kind of mitigated that and has made himself so successful, at least to this point.
Yeah,
One of the things,
go
ahead. I was just going to say, one of the things I want to talk about is, we talked about what a good start Condon's had, but with Florida, with Caglione, I mean, he's off to an incredible start so far with the bat. I mean, he's batting .545, and it's not just hitting the ball out of park. The other day, he had 4 singles, right, in the same game. So this is a guy who's not an all or nothing hitter. He's, hitting the ball the other way. He's going with the pitches, and he's going to see a lot of, breaking balls away, right? If you're going to try to stay away from him, and he's showing that he can go the other way with it. So, they swept Columbia this weekend. He threw on Sunday, which was his first start of the year. I watched most of that, on video, and he looked great. I mean, he had one little rough stretch where he gave up a walk, a hit, and then a 3-run bomb. But other than that, I mean, he threw 3 innings. He struck out 7. I think he walked 2. I mean, he's not, he wasn't dialed in from a control standpoint. It was his first game, but he was mid-90s. He flashed 98, 99 a couple times. He was good. I mean, it's just a question of, with him is can he stack those outings up. The other thing with Florida is the freshman Liam Peterson. He looked great on Saturday. He threw Tuesday, threw briefly, and then came back and threw again. I think he's thrown like maybe 7 innings so far this year, and over 2 starts, haven't given up a run. He's just he's so polished and calm for a freshman. He's looked really good. And then, Cade Fisher, who struggled in their opener, they lost the St. John's opener. He was good the other in his comeback start. I think he struck out 10, something like that, in 5 innings. I mean, he bounced back, and that was more what we expected from him, after seeing him last year and seeing him in the fall. So, and then offensively, Florida's, I mean, they're going to hit a lot of home runs with the middle of that order. The only thing I'll point out here is Cade Kurland was hit by a pitch on Friday and had x-rays on his hand, and they're negative, but they held him out for the rest of the weekend. So as a result, there were a lot of different lineups for Florida this weekend, and he's one of the best players in the conference, and they were able to sustain his absence and still have a strong offensive weekend.
Yeah, with it if Kurland continues to miss any time, it makes more important perhaps. Dale Thomas has some versatility defensively. Armando Albert, the FAU transfer, has some versatility. Ashton Wilson, the Charleston Southern transfer, has some of that. So they've got some pieces to move in there, but certainly nobody that's going to give them what Kurland gives them. On the pitching side, quickly too, much better start for Cade Fisher this weekend than the previous weekend. 5 innings, 5 hits, 2 runs, no walks, 10 strikeouts. And again, Columbia, but Columbia's a good program. So, if you're going to beat an Ivy League team, it's, kind of Columbia and Penn and kind of then everyone else in terms of quality. And so that's we're still going to need to wait and see on some guys, but that's not nothing, playing well against Columbia. So a good bounce back there for Cade Fisher. Final thing, Mark, because, we had a lot of, I guess we should maybe hand out some kudos here. There were some SEC teams that just took care of business the way they were supposed to take care of business. So, kudos to Tennessee. They had on Saturday, Albany hung with them for like a minute and then they just went nuts. So Tennessee takes care of business there. Alabama over Valpo took care of business there. A&M over
run rules. Yeah. They've had 4 run rules in a row. I mean, they're just mashing bad teams right now.
That's right. Yeah. Texas A&M over Wagner in a sweep. There was 2 2-0 game on Saturday in between games where A&M just crushed Wagner pitching. Yeah. So that was a sweep there. I think that does it for the sweeps. So that takes me to saying that the following teams took 1 loss this weekend, but ultimately had winning weekends. South Carolina losing a game to Belmont, Mississippi State losing a game to Georgia Southern, Vanderbilt losing a game to Gonzaga, LSU losing a game to Stony Brook. Yeah. Where have we heard that before? And Ole Miss losing a game to High Point. As to not lead the jury, I will leave it at that and then throw it to you. Which of those surprised you the most? And then as a follow-up, are there any that you feel like are indicative of something larger, or do we look at these as kind of, anybody can get got on any day?
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I am. I do think that with Ole Miss, they lost 4 games in a row. It was looking really bad, and then they responded right with 2 big wins. I mean, they had 15 runs in 2 innings on Sunday. It was just something crazy like that, and end up scoring 25. I mean, it's just nuts. The thing about Ole Miss is all of those transfers, they're a really heavy transfer team, and they have some holdovers there, but none of them are really in the same spots that they were last year. They've either had to take on new roles, or are they getting pushed out, right, for the transfers to come in, and it's just kind of taking some time, I think, to gel, and especially when things didn't go well. And so that's going to be interesting to see how they are able to push through this and if they can excel. I think the other one for me, I was a little bit surprised LSU dropped that game to Stony Brook. They're just not scoring enough runs offensively. They had a couple games, even a couple the games they won until Sunday, where they just didn't hit that much. So the pitching has been fine. The pitching's been better than fine most days. And it's just a question of, they're still playing with the lineup. There's a new lineup every day. They've got lots of options, and in the long run, they're going to be fine. But it's just trying to understand. You see some of these other teams just mashing similar opponents. Northern Illinois, what held them to a few hits one day, but LSU's not. So maybe it's nothing, but it does kind of make you look, well, why is Georgia doing this? Why is South Carolina or Alabama or whoever, right? They're putting up double digits. Why can't we, right? If you're an LSU fan. And so that would be the thing. Certainly the pitching has been, for the most part, has lived up to the lofty expectations we all had for the Tigers.
Yeah, through 2 weeks, it looks like Luke Holman is maybe, ticketed to be the ace right now. I mean, he's been really, really good in both of his starts. Thatcher Hurd has been okay. I got asked on Baton Rouge radio last week, and on New Orleans radio, actually. they both kind of asked me about Hurd, and I was like, I think he's, we're still figuring out, is he the Thatcher Hurd we saw early last year, or is he the Thatcher Hurd that we saw in the postseason? And the answer to me, if you really force me, is like he's probably somewhere in between. I just think we've seen enough of him now to know that he's just not going to be a dominant, super clean starting pitcher. It just doesn't seem like that's him. But Luke Holman, on the other hand, looks like he might be. But I say all that to say, if you're rolling out there, Holman, Hurd, 1-2, you're feeling pretty good. Like, so I don't think what we've seen from Thatcher Hurd is a reason for worry so much as it might just be a reason to say, okay, Holman's our Friday guy and Hurd's our Saturday guy. And then we'll roll with that.
Jump, when he's, as he continues to work back, I mean,
Correct.
He's a heck of a third guy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I get it. You wanted Thatcher Hurd to use last postseason as a springboard into something bigger, and maybe he still will. But even if he doesn't, like, I think we can still have an effective weekend starter in him moving forward. So,
and honestly, if they don't, and they need to do something else, they have options, and then they can kind of get him right and get him ready for the stretch run. And you see how that worked out a year ago.
Yeah, exactly. Friday they play Texas at Minute Maid Park. That will be that'll be a good one, folks. I assume they're going to see LeBaron Johnson for Texas. I've not paid attention to Texas rotation, but I think he's starting on Fridays for them, and he was excellent last weekend. So that'll be a fun little matchup. And any offensive issues that LSU has could be exacerbated by going up against one of the best arms in the Big 12. So it should be a lot of fun. So to answer it myself, I was with you at the time. I would have said the Ole Miss loss was the one that was like, oh my goodness, this might be a cataclysmic loss, because it wasn't just that they lost a High Point, a program that's hasn't been very good lately and is still trying to find its footing under a relatively new coaching staff. But it just wasn't competitive. And it just, I've said this before, like, nobody looks good losing to a team they're more talented than, but they just looked listless. Like, it just felt like there were bad vibes, but then they came out angry. And so now I'm feeling less worried about that loss because of the way they played the last 2 days. So I'm with you. And generally these losses, I don't take any of them and think like, that's a problem. Vanderbilt's one we haven't talked about it at all, but I just think Gonzaga is one of those teams. I mean, Gonzaga wasn't very good last year, but basically for the entire last decade, Gonzaga has just been a thorn in the side of every major conference program they travel to. I just think that's kind of what that program is. So they played Vanderbilt close a couple times and won a game. I'm not really worried about it. The bullpen wasn't great for Vanderbilt today, but a lot of that was defense. There were some errors that were costly. I saw the freshman Alex Kranzler was in there and got hung with 4 unearned runs, which, is not really what you're looking for. So
it's how you lose a game, especially at one.
No doubt about that. So yeah, my worry level is kind of low generally. And I liked that with State, Cal Steven got on Saturday, but Georgia Southern's not nobody as a program. And around it, you had a great start from Dome and you had a great start from Saint-Ja, right? And so when you talk about State, that being the primary problem they had last year, if they were going to fix one thing, it had to be the starting pitching. And through 2 weeks, they're on a positive track. And, I'm not going to go any further than that, make any declarative statements. I'm not going to do the mission accomplished banner, for those who get that joke, but certainly tracking in the right direction. I think that's indisputable.
Yeah, they're pitching so much better. It's no doubt. I think the thing for me on Mississippi State is they're not hitting the ball out of the park. And I know it's not the most hitter friendly, from a dinger standpoint, but they've hit 4 home runs all year. You tell me Dakota Jordan and Hunter Hines, I would expect them to have 4 by now, right? Combined anyway. You look around the league and, Alabama's got 2 guys with 5, right? And I know ballparks are different and all that kind of stuff, but I would just expect a little bit more punch from that lineup. And if they aren't doing it, someone else needs to. And that hasn't happened yet. And I think that's what's going to make it, kind of like what we talked about with Kentucky. If you pitch well, but don't have the home runs and you aren't really, playing small ball and manufacturing stuff, you're going to have trouble in these close games, because how are you going to score? You need too many singles. And I think that's where Mississippi State is. I don't know if they're just pressing or what, but those are there's some established hitters in that lineup that are, that are capable of. It's not just about home runs, but just being more productive. And I think that's going to be the key for them is they try to, get something established right before conference play.
Yeah, I mean, you look at their stat page and their top 3 hitters, at least looking at batting average, and really by most metrics, is Monty Larry, Hunter Hines, and Dakota Jordan. And you're like, okay, that's what you're looking for. But 2 things. One is that with the exception of Bryce Chance, who's kind of floating there in the middle as their 4th best guy and has been pretty solid, it drops off pretty quickly when you get into Heisick and then Johnny Long and Dylan Cupp. Then you have the injured guys or guys who have been injured, Mershon and Logan Kohler, although, in Kohler's case has played more. But Ross Heifel is hitting 100. And considering he's the offensive guy among the catchers, you're kind of looking for a reason to get him in the lineup, but hitting 100 is
he hadn't caught yet. He's only DH'd to this point.
Okay.
So
yeah, I mean, and when you're bad as your calling card, like it's tough when you're hitting 100. So the big thing though for me is that we talked about this last week, I think, but the second half of that lineup, whether it's people like Kohler getting not only healthy as he is, but then hot, and then David Mershon getting back and getting hot. However they do it, that the bottom half of the lineup just has to get better, because at this point, it kind of reminds me of a lineup we talked about last year. It kind of reminds me of Georgia's lineup, which is probably not a comparison Mississippi State fans are particularly happy to hear about. But the top half of Georgia's lineup, or at least the top 3 or 4, was great. It was Ben Anderson and Connor Tate and Charlie Condon and Parks Harbor. And then the bottom half of it, there were just a lot of games where it was kind of a black hole. And right now it feels like a little bit like that for State, where something has to happen with those top 3 or 4 guys, or it's not going to happen. And that's a tough place to live when you've got so many of these lineups where the 8 and 9 guys can do just as much damage sometimes as the meat of the order. So certainly something that is going to have to get better. All right, Mark. Well, that seems like an episode. I feel like we covered that pretty well. Things are ramping up. Week 3 promises to be pretty good. We've got, obviously, we talked about LSU in the Houston tournament. We've got rivalry series, South Carolina, Clemson, Florida and Miami, Georgia Tech. So I think there'll be more than this week in the past 2 weeks to talk about. So we are building up to the SEC play, which is now just 3 weeks away. So looking forward to everything between now and then, but especially to SEC play. But that is going to do it for this edition of Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Thank you to Pitch Logic for sponsoring this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. Thank you, Mark, as always, for joining me. And thank you, the listener, for listening.